Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Rick Beyer, Executive Chairman of Core Education, an innovative company whose approach is to provide shared services to small and mid-sized higher education institutions. Rick's had a very unique career in higher ed, one that has positioned him to make Core very successful. He sat on higher ed boards for over 20 years, was the president of Wheeling Jesuit University, and he's participated in more than 15 higher ed mergers. In fact, he's AGB's go-to consultant for mergers. Rick joins us today to talk about the use of shared services in higher education and how it can drive innovation and efficiency, both strategically and tactically. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Drumm. A pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. You and I have known each other for, a couple of 3 years through AGB, and having had multiple interactions with you, I am just so excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Drumm. Looking forward to talking with you more about small and medium-sized colleges and what can be done to help them prosper in the future.
And it is something that is clearly needed because right now you've got your large colleges who are doing just fine, but it's your small and your medium colleges that really are struggling with enrollment and many other things.
Yeah, that is correct, Drumm. What we have is probably really significant pressure and tension on small, mid-sized colleges. They just don't have the economies of scale as a bigger institution. And what happens is that kind of catches up to these institutions after a while, and they're unable, they don't have the resources to execute. They just have a lot more need, and they just don't have the capital or size to make things happen at the right level.
And that is a critical issue. I mean, we've been looking at a shakeout in higher ed for a number of years. I mean, my friend Gordon Gee said that at the beginning of the pandemic, he said, COVID is accelerating needed changes in higher ed by a decade or more. And I think he's spot on with that. There's a lot of systemic issues going out there that got postponed because of, I don't want to call them handouts, but basically large grants from the federal government.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to systemic issues. So there are systemic issues. There are many of them, but that is going to require transformational change. So not nibbling at the edges. You throw COVID in there on top of it, but without a doubt, you have a 10-year decline in demand for degrees. You have really severe business model challenges that are hitting small, mid-sized colleges. You have a 1.7 trillion of student debt, and just changing consumer behaviors, and now corporations are even having an impact on higher education. So all this kind of sums up to is the need for transformational change in higher ed.
Well, I think you're spot on with that. And it's interesting because corporations, which have traditionally never gotten involved with higher ed, they just take the quote product, the graduate, and do the changes that they need. They are getting more involved with advisory boards and other things. And then you're seeing institutions like Arizona State University and others who are actually doing programs for corporations.
Yeah, that is correct, Drumm. What's happening is you're seeing that, for example, more and more major corporations are no longer requiring a college degree for hiring. They're really looking more at competencies, skill-based. And so what's happening is that is impacting the market in a big way and actually causing learning to be delivered in different ways in the forms of training, credentials, badges, certificates that actually put the overall macro pressure on the overall demand for a college degree.
And the state of Maryland's come out and said, for many jobs, you no longer require a college degree.
Yeah, exactly. And, a college degree will still be around, there'll still be value. But when you take a look at not only just the demographic shift that we have going on in the country, but then a demand decline. So you have many colleges that today, particularly small, mid-sized colleges, are not only down because of COVID, they're also down because of a lower demand. And many of students, even what we used to call traditional student age college kids, are opting for a different kind of learning.
Which in some ways I can understand. And obviously that's not the subject of this podcast, but it's something that's interesting to both of us. I can understand that, but there's other things that are learned at a traditional university. There's a lot of emotional intelligence that is gained through the experiences of being away from family, etc. So, but that's a topic for a whole different.
We can spend a day on that one. You're exactly correct, Drumm.
Easily. But you alluded to the demographic shifts, and not only you have people who are not valuing the college degree as much as they used to, but you also have the enrollment cliff.
Absolutely.
And there are less traditional age college students that are going to be available.
Yeah, and when you couple that just demographic shift, and then you also get an also shift in what's remaining, another shift in lower demand. So you have this increasing systemic issues, as you said earlier. And for small and mid-sized colleges, it really means that they're going to have to transform their business model in a major way. And what they're going to have to do is look for alternatives on how to transform.
Well, one of the big drivers in a merger, something that I know you're very familiar with, is the efficiencies that you create from a larger institution. And that, for a small and even medium-sized college, that can take the form of shared services, which is what you do at Core Education. So if you would take me through that shared services marketplace, why do people go that route, and what's so important about it?
Yeah, I think when we think about what I'm going to call the consolidation era in higher education, you still will have, I'm going to call mergers of necessity, colleges that perhaps are ready to go out of business. You might see some strategic mergers, and then you're going to start to see what I'm going to call some affiliations. We're seeing more and more colleges saying we want to remain, we know we need help, but we need to remain independent and keep our identity. And so there starts to be a shift more towards affiliations. And the whole concept then of affiliations, and particularly where Core Education comes in, is allows a college to affiliate with a supporting organization that has substantial shared services without giving up their identity, without losing control of their institution, and actually enhancing their ability to focus on long-term prosperity.
Mm-hmm. So with an institution like this, what are the kind of things that you typically, or an institution would typically look for that would take them into the realm of transformation versus incremental change?
Yeah, I think that what we see is oftentimes when colleges try to think about transformation just within their organization, there's also sometimes just pre-existing limitations that they put on themselves in terms of what is possible. Then all of a sudden you're talking to an external organization. And when the people at Core talk with institutions, they talk about what can be, what is possible. And oftentimes the small and mid-sized colleges didn't even think it was possible to do certain things. And so it's that whole concept of transformation. But transformation has to come in stages, but it does require a fundamental shift in thinking about what I'm going to call organizational assumptions and all kinds of assumptions that align to the marketplace. And that gives you an opportunity when we think about financial improvement, financial sustainability, and financial prosperity, or think short, medium, and long term. There are things that you have to do immediately because colleges are under immediate short pressure, but it can be part of a pathway towards transformation by aligning or affiliating with an organization or with a supporting organization like CORE.
So what would drive something like this? I mean, something that comes to mind for me is, smaller institutions really lack the depth of resources needed to deliver strong services across the board to their students.
Yeah, exactly right. And the two areas that CORE focused on extensively with our institutions is in what I want to call revenue growth and diversification and technology. So when we talk about the depth of services or depth of resources, just the student acquisition process has now become an e-commerce process. It's become a 7x24 digital student acquisition process that involves technology, involves new operating rhythms, new workflows. And so colleges oftentimes just don't have the resources to even think about that, let alone how to implement it. And so as they work with a supporting organization like CORE Education, we already have those people. We already have those people that can redesign the workflows, that can help implement the technology that they need to dramatically shift, increase their inquiries, increase their applications, and increase matriculation.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that makes perfect sense because the whole enrollment process right now has become so, in many cases, automated. I mean, one of my partners is Perdea Education, and they have put the entire enrollment process on somebody's phone.
Exactly. And the students today are mobile, and when they want answers, they want them immediately. And so if our systems and our workflows are not designed to meet that, the students will then look for other alternatives. And what's nice about from a small and mid-sized college is they just can't they don't have the resources to get their heads around that. So when we take a look at what economies of scale can do from a CORE perspective, we have the industry's best lead generation, workflows, enrollment support, contact center resources that can actually help work with the college on really driving that enrollment and driving that revenue growth and diversification.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I know even large state-run institutions who have challenges with their technology. I'm thinking of one in particular who they run one central instance of Banner for their SIS. And all the institutions in that system run through that. But if you don't have someone, staff or whoever, to deal with those other institutions, if you just have your main flagship doing it, that can create issues for smaller institutions.
Yeah, exactly. When you think about what our tech teams, talk with our small institutions about partners with, is that just in the areas of technologies that we've identified 35 competencies in technology that an organization, a campus will need to have. So it really doesn't matter if you have 1, 5, 15, 20 people. You're still not going to have those competencies. And so we also then break down technology into campus, enterprise, and revenue. And those are 33 distinct. And then we also break down technology by stabilization and modernization. So what we do is meet those colleges where they're at and over time show them how they can get greater efficiencies and effectiveness through the economies of scale of many institutions.
Sure. Well, it makes perfect sense. This is what you're talking, the shared services landscape. It's not a new concept. There's other folks out there. A TCS education system was really, and Michael Horowitz, his group of folks have done a great job with this. National University has done it to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I would say really CORE is really modeled after that because these are very two successful organizations, particularly TCS. When you look at Every one of them, I think there's 6 or 7 institutions. Every one of those institutions are doing better today than they were when they joined TCS. And what they have today, now they've been out there for 10 years now, they have all unified technology. There are significant marketing resources. There's back-end services. And the colleges all have their board and their president and their staff. But they're all doing better today.
There's a lot of other large institutions who do this type of shared service as well. The example that I just gave you a little while ago about centralized SIS systems and things like that. But there are certain efficiencies that a large system gives, and shared services can provide these same efficiencies. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. When you take a look at, let's just take the student information system, or what I'll call enterprise technology. Oftentimes colleges will still run some old technology, but as you move that into the cloud, or what I'll call a cloud-based enterprise system or cloud-based SIS, all of a sudden your resources, your tech resources for enterprise can be literally located anywhere. They may be on campus, but they don't have to be on campus. And then also from an economies of scale, if you have a $500 million system in terms of just system budget, colleges might spend 4 to 5% on technology. That represents at a $500 million system budget about $20 million of tech. And if you're running a $50 million organization, you might have a total budget of $2 million. So as you get together, you can see what you can do with $20 million is a lot more than what you can do with 2.
Oh, absolutely. And a shared services company such as TCS, such as yours, you're able to provide these kind of services for smaller colleges at greater economies of scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what that means is that for those small, mid-sized colleges, they have more resources and they're able to do a lot more with their current budget than what they're doing today.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I like about the model, an institution can maintain its own identity. I mean, that's one of the things the boards think about significantly is how do we maintain our own identity? We have been around for 50 years, 100 years, whatever it is, and markets go up, markets go down. We're in a period of transformation in higher ed. So how do we keep ourselves as part of this higher ed tradition, but at the same time remain viable?
That is correct. I think that what you see is that institutions are really kind of repulsing away from mergers because of that need to stay and keep that identity, keep your mission, keep your identity. And oftentimes, what too many times the colleges will do on what I'll call the smaller colleges, they'll just wait too long because they don't know if there's any other alternatives. And that's why as colleges learn more about affiliations and supporting services, it all of a sudden will open the door for small and mid-sized colleges just to say, wait a minute, we don't necessarily have to merge. There's another option. Mm-hmm. We may be able to take a look at supporting and shared services.
Yeah. And this is all part of the shift that needs to happen in higher education as far as a business model goes. I mean, we've seen a lot of mergers. We've seen a lot of colleges going out of business over the last 5 to 10 years. Forget the for-profits because they come and go with far more frequency. But colleges like Boston College acquiring Pine Manor College and changing the roles of that. We're seeing a lot of really good and thoughtful merger activity out there. This is a alternative to that kind of merger, but I would bet that it's not for everyone. It's got to be for institutions that are still relatively financial healthy. Am I correct?
That is correct. And I think that for the institutions who, let's just say, are ready to close, likelihood of a merger is probably their only option right now. And for example, the Pine Manor Boston College, might be one example of what I'm going to call an 11th hour. But for those institutions, 1,000 to 5,000 students, a budget of 25 to 100 million, and just a modest endowment, they have to look and say, can we get to our long-term prosperity ourselves? We want to stay independent, but can a partnership help? Can an affiliation help? Can a shared service help? Those are going to be more of the much better options for those colleges who aren't looking. They're not going out of business, but they just may not like their numbers and know that they have to transform and may need some help.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about partnership, we're starting to see different kinds of partnerships. You're talking about the partnership like what you would do at CORE, what TCS does. We're seeing partnerships that ASU, Arizona State University, is doing, and SNU. But also there's the partnerships of perhaps like a John Brown or something like that, which is branching off into their being acquired by a nonprofit to be able to provide different kinds of services.
Yeah, that is true. No, in that organization, that John Brown they're going to be able to leverage shared services and economies of scale. In that transaction, though, they will change of control. What we find in the marketplace, just particularly in the M&A space, is that giving up control for the small college at the board level becomes a very, very difficult decision. And what we typically see is if we could find another alternative, not only keep our identity and independence, but if we can't give up control, we don't have to give up control, that would be our ideal situation. So you have a lot of these different types of segments of the market. You'll have some that require control and some that require no change of control.
Mm-hmm. So that's really a decision that's going to rest with your board. Am I right?
That is correct. And typically what you see at the board level is the willingness to give up control. It's a very, very high bar. Now, if you're about ready to close, then that bar becomes much, much lower, where then a board might say, well, we have no choice but to give up control. But generally speaking, what boards will want to do and the institutions will want to do is remain independent and keep their identity, keep their control. And then as an institution, maybe if they continue to slide downwards, then all of a sudden those options, they start to lose some of those options.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is, of course, is most institutions wait too long before their willingness to give up control, and they don't make them an attractive merger prospect or really an attractive prospect for shared services. Am I right?
Yeah, that is correct. What you'll see is boards will say, we still have resources. There's no reason for us to do a transaction. But that isn't really the underlying reason for not doing a transaction. You have to really look at the underlying trends of what's happening with your institution, your prosperity gap. Do I have the management team in depth capable of getting me there? And too often times what will happen is that through just inaction, colleges will just wind down their assets. And then all of a sudden, what I'm going to call an 11th hour transaction takes place. So this is really this real sensitive area. So for boards, it's critically important for them to be strategic. If somebody says, "Wow, we're going to be, we only have about 5 years left. We better really get it together." That's a good time to be, thinking about, some partnerships or shared services or anything that you could really make a difference for your institution.
Mm-hmm. And that takes a board being a strategic board versus a management board. The challenge being is most small and even medium size, it's difficult when you're that small to keep your hands off the throttle.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly correct. And the trustees and their urge to do good, right? They want to help the institutions. You might have people think, well, I've got competencies in this area or that area, but what trustees also don't realize is how little time they actually spend with the institution throughout a year. They just really don't have what I'm going to call the full awareness, understanding of what is needed or what is gap is needed, or how the level of the lack of depth of resources to actually execute on something. So When they're strategic, boards can do tremendous work. They really can do tremendous work. And, what it takes is also a very strategic president. I mean, if you get a strategic president with a strategic board or even a strategic executive committee, it really is a very good recipe for success.
And hence the work that my firm does with board governance. And then the next step is the work that you do with shared services and mergers.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Your work with governance is important to be able to help a board realize that they have to act as a collective body. So sometimes you might have 2 or 3 or 4 really great board members, and then a lot of maybe inactive. They all care about the institutions, but I think in your work, Drumm, in terms of helping boards realize that. We may have an executive committee that's really innovative, but we also have to be able to operate as a full governing body and get that through. So that's really good work that you're doing.
Fiduciary duties are both individual and collective.
100% agree.
And when you've seen one board, you've seen one board.
Exactly right.
We both know that one all too well.
Yes.
So just quickly, what are some of the typical services that a shared services company would offer? I know you talked about personnel, you've talked about tech systems. What are some of the other ones?
Well, helping out with campus enrollment growth, maybe focusing in on segments of the marketplace like transfer students or particular student persona. A shared service organization can help move campus revenue. They can help with online degree enrollment and even workforce development enrollment. Now, other areas they can do is back end. They can do financial services at campus operations, even shared content, shared academic programming among institutions. So there's a number of them. The key in what you'll see in these organizations is to start in 1 or 2 focused areas, and then over time, the institution will become more and more very interested, like wow, let's get more and more shared services because they all of a sudden start to realize the value. So I would call it like a crawl, walk, run approach, where they start and all of a sudden realize what can be, and then next thing you know, they're on that road to transformation.
Which makes perfect sense, because if in fact you're initially starting with back-end services, but the accreditors, which is, accreditors are buying into this model significantly. And if you're working with all accredited universities, there's nothing to say that you can't start sharing courses, sharing faculty, these type of things. And that's certainly going to impact your bottom line in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, under these kinds of shared programming and everything, it's important that each institution still remain that decision body. Have that faculty governance. They're in control of everything. But even at the accreditors level, they realize that the market has changed, and they're working with their institutions, and they realize that innovation and transformation is necessary. And so you're seeing a lot of innovation out there, and oftentimes the accreditors are part of that innovation. They're innovating themselves.
Mm-hmm. And there are some accreditors who have really embraced these type of things without naming any particular accreditor. I know of a number of them who they know if they're working with TCS or with CORE or something else, that these type of things are all covered in a very good way. It's not to say that they're not going to go in and investigate as they should, but it gives them an additional level of confidence. Am I right?
Yeah, you're exactly correct. I think around the country you'll see different types of just like a board, right, of an institution. You might see one board here doing another thing, but you do have pockets of innovation happening even on the regulatory and the accreditors, which is really good, I think, for the overall industry.
I think it is as well. Rick, I knew this conversation was going to go by quickly, and it certainly has. 3 takeaways for university and college presidents with respect to shared services.
Just realizing that there's a pathway for what I'm going to call immediate financial improvement, which is short-term, what I'll call sustainable financial. So, think short, medium, and long term. So think about financial improvement, financial sustainability, financial prosperity, and a shared service organization can help an institution lay that pathway out and get there. So it's not just about thinking long-term, it's also thinking short-term and being able to get the results that the presidents need. The presidents need to continue to think about transformation, get their board leadership focused on transformation, as well as their cabinet focused on transformation. And then probably the third one would be just internal communications, that if you focus on prosperity, the path forward might look different than it was in the past. But I think if you could set the language forward from strength, that we're focused on being independent, being a long-term prosperous institution, but that pathway is likely to look vastly different going forward than it was in the past, helps set good expectations.
I think those are great takeaways. Thank you. So what's next for you, Rick? What's next for CORE?
Yeah, well, we're rolling out 10 institutions. The total system budget of those 10 are just about $500 million of revenue or budget. We think we'll probably double that by the end of 2023. And our focus is to keep our eye on the ball, work with our small, mid-sized institutions, give them that pathway for financial improvement, sustainability, and prosperity, and just keep hiring really great people.
Well, it's always the people that make the difference, and if you're any testament to what CORE is doing, I think you're in great hands.
Well, thank you, Drumm. Appreciate that, and the people at CORE are really sharp, and it is all about people.
It is. Well, Rick, thank you so much for being on the show. It's great to connect with you again, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you. All the best to you, Drumm.
You too. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to today's guest, Rick Beyer of CORE Education, and for his sharing with us how shared services can help small and mid-sized colleges become more efficient and better at innovation. Our next guest is Randy Hendricks, CEO of Zovio, who'll be joining us to talk about what's going on in the OPM marketplace and how the future of OPMs may shake out. It'll be a great session. You won't want to miss it, folks.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.